and he's going to be showing you the ins and outs of the short films and beautiful animations that he creates in Blender. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to him to enlighten you on his process. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. All right, yeah, mostly what I'm going to be talking about tonight is a few months ago I did a music video for the band Awolnation. They released an album of cover songs, including, thankfully, one of my favorite songs of all time, The Beds Are Burning, which was originally by Midnight Oil, and through a friend I got hooked up with the gig based on an earlier music video I'd done that was very synthwave, retro-wave outrun style, and he saw it and really liked it and wanted something similar for his video. So before I get more into it, I'll just show you the video now so you know what I'm talking about from here on out. But basically, I'm going to show you the video. I'll talk about some of the scenes from it, and then I'm going to break down a couple of the bigger scenes that I did in the video and show you how I put them together in Blender. And without further ado, here's the video, and right, there we go. Thanks, good night. I'm gonna head out. No. So there we go. Oh, let me hold it back up just so I can run through it here. All right, so let me turn the sound down. I'm just gonna kind of scrub through and talk about it a little bit here. So yeah, as I was saying, about a year ago over the holiday break, I recently picked up one of the Rokoko Motion Capture suits, and I have one of those at home that I've been using, that I was using for an animated short I was working on, but on the side I write music sometimes too, and I just was messing around and wrote a song over the holidays when we had some time off work, and then I was learning Blender at the same time, and I wrote this little ditty and wanted to put some music or put some visuals to it. And so I wore the mocap suit and I listened to it in my earbuds and danced to it for 3 minutes or so, however long the song was. And then I put that on a certain character of mine, and just in the course of a week, using just Blender and the motion capture, I put together a whole music video and put it online. And it's interesting because you never know where your work's gonna come from. The video, got noticed by some people. Some people liked the song, and actually a label picked it up and released the song. And also, a friend of mine forwarded the video to his friend, who he'd done a music video for Awolnation, one of their previous songs for them. And he showed him my video because he had just had a kid and didn't have time to work on it. So he's like, "Well, hey, my friend just did this." He showed it to him, and he was super excited about it. He's like, "I just want exactly that, so just do that." And it was this very sort of synthwave outrun type of video, and so that's kind of the visuals we went with this whole thing. And it started out with some discussion with Aaron Bruno, who's the singer of Awolnation, and I talked to him over the phone a little bit how I could bring the mocap suit over to his house. He could put it on and do some of his dancing, just like I did for my video, and then I could make some sci-fi characters that would fit into the style, and we could plug that motion capture onto those characters. And as far as just figuring out ideas beforehand, we had the, let's see, this up. It started out just kind of texting with them. I put together a style board for the whole look we were going for. And this is what we came up initially. If I can zoom in a little here, there we go. Yeah, so this is what I came up with. We kind of had background styles on the left side here, the types of characters we were gonna have, which were these kind of very futuristic, androids and stuff. And I was trying to avoid having any talking or facial stuff, because that takes a lot longer than just standard motion capture rigging faces. But we ended up having one just for his face, which I'll show you here in a sec. And then some of these I copied pretty literally into it. Like we have these androids here with these helmets right here. And if I go to the video here, actually, these are the guys right here that were in the video. So what we ended up building was 2 side characters, these androids, and then Aaron Bruno himself, which was the main character here. Let me turn off the soft shadows there. Turn on some bloom, then you can get a full effect of these glowy guys. And this is kind of what we started with. I got these approved by him, and then it was just kind of off to the races as far as creating shots. As far as direction, we didn't have a real clear direction other than just style, and I was just kind of freestyle it and start coming up with ideas. But the timeline was very short as well, and I was doing it in my free time in the evenings after work and on the weekends, and we had just under a month to complete the whole thing. So it was a little scary, and it was really fast moving. But yeah, I did an initial test. My wife and I actually got to go out to his house in Malibu, which was kind of fun, hang out at a rock star's house out by the beach in the mountains, hang out with his dogs, and put him in a motion capture suit. And I took some pictures of him too, just to try to get some style, to try to make it look like him and with the 3D model. So this is what he looks like if you're not familiar. Hope he doesn't get mad if he ever sees this for showing this picture, but at least I didn't show the picture of him in the motion capture suit, because the motion capture suit fits me, and I'm a big guy. He's about 1/3 my size, so it took a lot of strapping to make it fit tight on him. So, all right, so, and yeah, we put that together, and what we ended up with was this guy right here. back on, zoom in a little here. And this was him. Of course, I didn't mess with the eyes too much because it makes it harder to get the likeness, so I put this visor on it, but this is about what we ended up with. It's kind of got his hairstyle, his self-admitted short hair with a slight mullet in the back, so he said that, not me. I would never say that. Yeah, and then once we got that done, I just tried to make it kind of psychedelic too. I made a very basic toon shader on him, which is this here, with this sort of just a trippy pattern I found on a stock footage, stock art website. Because everything here I tried to do very low cost and very, well, part of the reason I like Blender is it's free. And it's sort of how I've sold previous live streams where I've talked about this. I try to keep everything very cheap and inexpensive to be able to make big projects. It's how I used to, it's why I got into previs, which is what I do for a living. And it's why I got into Blender initially too, because there's so much it can do natively without having to buy anything, and that's what I'm trying to show you here today too. There's a lot of skill you gotta learn with it too, but I mean a lot of it is very simple and straight out of the box too. I mean just simple things like if you want to get stylized with synthwave, retro-wave stuff, even just the glowy effects in it already get you started there, so. All right. And just to get a little more into this, so I'm going to show you how I broke down a couple of these scenes here, such as one of the most popular shots from it, and the ones that Aaron liked the most, was this one where we're kind of walking down the hallway here with this reflective floor in the hallway. And then there was also another shot where we have this whole army of guys walking. Where was it here? Oh, it's near the beginning. There we go. Which I like to call the budget army, which you'll see why when I get there, because one of the hardest things to do in 3D software is to make an army of characters that's not going to kill your system really fast, you know, without having to buy some really expensive plugin or extra software that's going to put all your animated characters in there and make all these random animations all blend together with thousands of characters in it. So there's a way to sort of hack it together in Blender to get something simple out of it. All right. So yeah, to start off, the first thing I did, of course, as I said, we went to his house and I put the motion capture suit on him, and it was kind of funny. He was a little embarrassed to do it in front of us, so I put the motion capture suit on him, I showed him how to hit record, and then we had to go leave and hang out with his dogs outside for a half hour until he waved out the window saying he was done, and he listened to it, you know, 3 or 4 times in his earpods and like danced to it, and then I came back in and made sure it recorded, and then we took off and went home and, you know, hoped it were all recorded okay. He could see that it was running while we were doing it, so we knew it was recording, but I wasn't quite sure what I was going to end up till I got home. And this is one of the ones I put on it, which is just him straight up dancing on it, so you can kind of see what it looked like. So now if you ever see Awolnation live, you can try to see if this is how he dances on stage, which he might, so. Or how he dances to his own songs too, so. I definitely dance to my own music, different than other people's music, so get way more into it. But this isn't necessarily cleaned up from the motion capture either. This was just a little test I did first off, just so he could see the character we created. Yeah, that's him, I didn't do that. And yeah, but I sent it to them, sent this to him, and he liked it, so yeah, then we just went and got started and started plugging it into characters. Throughout the whole video, there's the 3 different characters. This one was, whenever it's this character dancing, I call it the psychedelic Aaron. It's all his dancing. And then when you have the 2 side characters, these androids, that was me at home doing fill-in dancing. So, yeah, so let's see. All right, just to show you what it looks like a little bit here, I have this behind the scenes. So like I was saying, I have the Rokoko Motion Capture suit, which I use to do most of the animation, and it has its own animation capture software, which has a pretty good, easy cleanup system in it. And then once you're done, it'll export your skeleton out to any software you want. Pretty much has a bunch of different defaults that'll work with Unreal and pretty much any other 3D software out there. And then what I was doing is I was plugging it into a program called Reallusion Character Creator. And the reason I like Character Creator is it's sort of like a video game version of a character creator where you just have a base human, And then you can push and pull all these sliders that will make their facial shape change, their body stuff change. You can give them skinny legs and giant shoulders and stuff like that. But the cool thing about it is once you have the general range of character you want, it has a little Go Z button in it now, which will send that character over to ZBrush directly, load it all up, and then you can just sculpt away on it and just make it all these crazy proportions if you want. I didn't go too extreme with this because Aaron's a human being, but you can get really cartoony with it, and then when you're done, you just hit another button and it brings it right back into Reallusion, and it takes you can feed your Rokoko Motion Capture directly into it, and you can have your character moving immediately. And once you're done, you can just save that out as an FBX file and open it up straight in Blender, and then all you have to do is tweak the textures. So yeah, and once we go through that, oops, sorry. This is kind of what it looks like. This is just a quick little TikTok video I made for them to show after we did the video, but this is just a quick run through of how it all looked. So this was the character in Blender rigged up, getting some posing. So this is how it looks in Rokoko when you're recording live, and then you can play it back and do some cleanup, which is this little timeline down below. It'll just do things like knee popping, keep the feet stuck to the floor, cut down on drift with their feet, which are some of the more common issues with motion capture. And then here's the skeleton. It exports directly to Blender if you don't even want to go through the Reallusion software. Yeah, and then here it is. So there's the motion capture skeleton, and then this is the character in Blender once I transferred it over to it. Because the other thing that's cool about Rokoko is it comes with its own Blender plugin, so that anything you record in Rokoko, you can either live stream into Blender or Unreal if you're using that and other 3D software. Or if you're using a different control rig that's somewhat custom like I am, I use a thing called the Auto Rig Pro, which is an add-on for Blender that I use. And it'll create a pretty standard rig, but with a full control rig and facial controls if you want to go that far. But it comes with a preset to transfer all your motion capture data onto the correct controllers in the Auto Rig Pro control rig. And so here it is lined up. And then it's just on the character here in Blender. And this is all real time, which is great. So, this is the scene I'm going to build for you here in a sec too. This is just the lit tunnel walk, just kind of showing you how it looks. So going around. Yeah, and this is the other one. This is kind of the budget army scene, which I'll show you. This is relatively easy to put together. So, all right, there you go. Now let's get into it. All right, so starting here, we got our 3 characters here. I'm just gonna hide these guys from now and just keep the psychedelic Aaron in for scale. And so now we're gonna make that lit tunnel hallway, and to start with, I'm just going to create a little sphere here. A mesh UV sphere. And one thing that's cool about this is Blender has a lot of modifiers that'll just save you a lot of time on making just big scenes out of nowhere. If anybody uses Maya, it's the same as instancing in Maya. When you start instancing your models to make duplicates of them so it doesn't bog down your scene. The modifiers are basically doing the same thing with a modifier called an array modifier. But we won't be using this guy much. I'm just kind of keeping him in here for scale. But let me move him over to the side. Get him out of the way. All right, there we go. All right, so this will be a little weird at first, but when you see where it goes, it's actually pretty cool. So start with a little sphere here. Don't have to worry about scale too much yet, but when you go over to this little tool here, well, it actually looks like a literal tool. You go under Add Modifier and use Array. And that's just going to make the duplicates from you. Oh, first as well, when you create it here, it looks all jittery with your faces here. Just go under Shade Smooth and it'll smooth it right out for you so it looks a lot better. And once we have that, you go over to your, also here we have your factor, which is the distance between the spheres, and then you have your count, which of course is how many you have. So we're just going to go across here. Let's see. Yeah, let's do about 40 for now. And then the spacing, we can kind of eyeball it, but try to keep it right around there. Like I said, it's still all based on the first sphere, so if you want to change it a little bit afterwards, you still can. You can scale it up and down for size. So now we have the one across, and we're trying to make this plane of spheres that we're going to curve into the tunnel, which we're starting to build out here. So now we have the one going across. Now we just add another array modifier, and same thing, just, oops, before we do that, we don't want it to go on the x-axis, which is across. We're going to go on the y-axis, going away from us, which is different from Maya, and Maya would be the z-axis, of course. There we go. Let's do a little, maybe 2. And then we're going to do a whole bunch, make a nice long tunnel. All right. Let's go 150. Hopefully it won't kill the computer here. But, all right, so what we have here is now we have this array, and what we want to do is set this up so that we can project some really cool, colorful visuals on it. And to show you an example of what we're trying to put onto it is, oh, hang on. I'm gonna do a little add-on here. This is a great add-on. I won't get into details on this, but if you don't already know about the import images as planes is one of the most awesome add-ons for any 3D software I've found. I love it. So make sure you enable that first thing in Blender. And what it will let you do is go to your images as planes, and you can bring in your video here, which is, oh yeah, dance of multicolored colors. All right. So if I bring that in here, rotate on the Y 90 degrees, scale it up just to kind of show you what we're seeing here. So this is the texture I'm going to put on these, and if you kind of scrub through, you can see it's sort of psychedelic color thing going here. All right. So the way to get that on here is once you have all these spheres, we want to make this a single object now. So we can go ahead and apply our arrays to it. Go and apply that, and then apply that one. And now it's just one single object. And we're going to get into the UV stuff. Might be a little boring, but trust me, it gets really cool really fast. So we're going to jump over to the UV editing section here. All right, so now we've got all our spheres here. We're going to go into an orthographic view, top down, and we're just going to do a project from view. And you'll see on the left here how it lays it out. All right, so there's our UVs for our spheres. So what we're doing here is we're setting it up almost like a LED, like a sign scroller that would have words going across it, like a Jumbotron you would have. And the way we do that is we want to take all these spheres and scale them down so that each individual sphere only takes up about a single point of space on your texture. And the reason we want to do that is because we want it to, as each color on the video comes across it, we want it to, we don't want it to have a blend between colors. We just want it to be that one solid color. Otherwise, I mean, you could maybe experiment with that too, but in my experience, it causes weirdness when you're trying to blend it together and make it look like a nice solid piece. So all you do is select it all here. And what you'll want to do is up here at the top, we have our pivot here. And it defaults to bounding box center, which is going to be the center of everything you have selected, and you can scale it and move it based on the center of there. But we're going to switch it to individual origins, which will make it scale or move based on the center of each individual non-touching piece, which is all these individual spheres. And then you just hit S to scale down, and we're just going to scale all these spheres down until they're just a single point as much as you can. And this can actually get kind of heavy even on a beefy computer here, but you can sort of see them scaling down. Not sure how well it shows there, but I'll zoom in and you'll see, because once you scale down a bit and click off, it'll pop up a window at the bottom, which makes it a little easier down here. You have your XYZ scale here, so just select those and just type 0.01. It's still going to take a second here. This is where I should have prepared a song. But get the Jeopardy. Can we cue the Jeopardy song? No. All right. It's thinking. It's getting there. It's just taking its time because this is when things start to get really cool. So can't let it get there too fast. Come on. As long as it doesn't crash. Come on. And I didn't quite do it. One more time here. 0.01. There we go. But this is the last boring step. Once you have this set up, you can really start playing with it and having some fun. So, because after this, we can just project the texture on it and start shaping it and turning on the glow in Blender, and things start getting all trippy. All right, there we go. So if I zoom in, you can kind of tell here, each one is just a tiny little point. And that's probably close enough. You could even scale it down if you want a little more, if you have time to just hanging at home doing this. But for this presentation, we will not wait for that. We're going to head back over to the layout section here. And now that we have it, let's go back to here. We're going to add a shader on it, a new shader. And we're going to use an emission shader, which an emission shader is just basically a solid color. It doesn't take light or shadow or anything like that. It's just the solid color. There's no gradations or anything, which is perfect for this type of stuff. All right, so we got our color there. I'm going to open a little side window here to open the shader editor. All right, so here's our emission shader. Just to kind of show you what it's doing here. The emission shader, we could make it red, for example, here. And one thing that's cool about Blender is it's glowy stuff. So if you have your bloom turned on here in your settings, you have extra settings here which we can play with later. But if you just put on your straight emission shader, it comes in with the strength of 1, which isn't all that impressive. But as you set your color and start dragging it, as you get higher, then it starts getting all crazy. So now we're getting into the retro wave stuff here. And so we can do the same thing with images. So it's all based on the strength. So for the color, we'll just go over here, create an image texture. And we're going to open up that same video that I had on the little plane that I brought in, the Dance of Multicolored Colors. And we're going to change it to cyclic, which will make the video keep looping, and auto refresh, which will make it keep refreshing as you scrub through the scene as you're looking at it. And then also you'll want the amount of frames that the video will play, which this is timeline's about at 250. We'll just stick with that. There you go. And now just plug it in to the color. There you go. And now you got it on there, and as you scrub through, you can see the colors just warping across that, which is pretty cool, especially once you get down here at this level and start looking down the street there. All right. And then same thing, yeah, you can start playing with your brightness, for how much you want it to glow in your scene. You can do it with the strength here, and then you can also go into your bloom here, which has the radius for how much it just has the overall bloom outside of it. You can bring that down a bit and then bring the intensity up. Usually looks a little better. And if you're not playing with videos like this too, you can even affect the colors as well. All right, so now we got that. We got our glowy piece here. I'm gonna go ahead and hide that sucker. Actually, we don't need that. Let's just get rid of it. And we're gonna hide Psychedelic Aaron for a second. And now what we want to do is we're going to rotate this up on the y-axis 90 degrees, and we're going to freeze transformations, or apply transforms if you're in Blender, but if you're using Maya, it's freeze transformations, same thing. It zeroes out all the translation, location, rotation, and scale. And now we go back to the deformers, and or I'm sorry, sorry, not the deformers, that's the Maya version of it, but they're modifiers. And as you'll see here, there's ones that can generate, ones that can deform. There's so many fun ones you can play with. And for this one, we're going to do the simple deform, which is just going to, that's looking a little trippy, but we just want to basically make a bend down the y-axis. So we're going to choose the y-axis here, and we're going to choose bend. And you can already see it starting there. And it's 45 degrees, but we're going to do a half circle, so just do a straight 180 there. Oops. There we go. And there you go, instant tunnel. And if you turn off the selection here, you can kind of see how it's looking. And actually, if you got a little more time too, you could even make your spheres here a little bit denser so you can actually see the graphics that scroll through it a little better. But it starts getting pretty heavy on the system then too, because we're not really using instance geometry anymore. This is all actual geo, all these individual spheres now. So yeah, then we got that, and if we, then we bring in back our psychedelic Aaron here. And start putting him in place. Oops, come on. All right. Get him in the center, and we can kind of scale it up to match. All right, grab X. Grab Y. Another thing I love about Blender too is you don't really if you want to move things around in your scene, everything's done with just either hitting grab, G for grab, R for rotation, without having to hit a manipulator like this. You can turn on a manipulator, drag it around like this, which is what I'm used to from using Maya, because I use a lot of Blender now, but I still use Maya full-time at my job. It's what I've been using for the last 15 years. So a lot of this I make a direct comparison to how Maya does it. And it actually makes Blender a little weird when you first start using it too, but the great thing about Blender is there's a lot of people on YouTube that used Maya first too, and they have literal videos that are called How to Use Blender for an Ex-Maya User. So it'll show you how to make that transition over with all the new hotkeys and where things are put in the menus. All right, so we got that. And the thing that's cool too is we have a pretty short tunnel here overall. It doesn't really go that far. But the thing that's cool is now we have the first one made. So now we can just select it, hit Shift-D to duplicate it. Then I'm going to scale it in Y by -1, which will just kind of reverse it. And I drag it down here to the end of the other one, so that where the other one ends, the next one picks up, almost like they link together. So that way you can kind of see where they meet, and you can barely tell. So makes a nice little blend. And then just pick both of those, duplicate them again, Shift-D. Whoops, that wasn't Shift-D. Shift-D. See, it's getting a little heavy now. All right. And just grab it in the Y-axis. Yeah, so you don't even need a manipulator, is what I was saying. You can just go here, and if you don't have your manipulator on screen, you're just kind of looking down the row here in this Y-axis. You can just hit G and then Y in the Y-axis and drag your mouse, and then it just starts dragging it down there for you, which is great. Whoops, but don't go into your ortho view like that. Yeah, so you grab it in your Y. Come on. There we go. And then I'm just doing the same thing. You don't have to reverse scale it anymore though, because now the end of that one is where the first one starts. So you just kind of eyeball it to line it up. And there you go. Now you have a really long tunnel which stretches down plenty, because once we start doing the scene, we're going to use a real wide lens and make it all Beastie Boys kind of rap video style with a 8mm lens, so it looks like it goes on forever. All right. So yeah, next you're going to bring in your character, which I was showing you here. We have our Aaron Bruno character. And one of the coolest things about Blender too, which there's a million tutorials for this out there, but I'll just show you a quick rundown too, and one of the reasons I like it is it's very easy to make a simple toon shader in Blender without too much effort. I mean, you can, like if you just make a mesh here, like a little UV sphere real quick, grab it over to the side. I mean, you can make it in less than 5 minutes here. I'll show you. It's just a couple nodes every time and it works perfect. So go back into your layout here. Make it shade smooth here. So if you just have a basic sphere here, you go in and just give it a very like its default shader, the principal BDSF, which gives you all your specular, your roughness, all that. But you don't really need to worry about any of that stuff. All you want is the base color. And all you want is this sort of gradation of color to feed into something else. So drag that out. And what you want to do is convert it from a shader to RGB. So if you go in here to a converter, you have convert it to shader to RGB. And you'll see what this does in a second, and it'll make a little more sense. And you're going to make a color ramp. All right. So now we have it in there. It still looks the same right now because we're using a color ramp to adjust the amount of white to black on the ball, which you can kind of see how it affects it here if we want it to be more black like that. And this is mostly just feeding in the color, which is white. We want it to be the brightest now, but if you wanted to darken it, it would make this all, you know, harder to adjust to. But we want to keep that at full brightness because we're plugging in our own colors. So, but the one thing, if we're doing a toon shader, we don't want these smooth gradations. We want it to be hard edges like cell shading. So all you got to do is go into your color ramp here and change it from linear to constant. There you go. And now you just have this hard edge. Oops. Froze up on me there. There you go. There we go. All right. And another thing you'll want to do, I did this earlier, and I didn't talk about it, but one thing you'll want to do as well is you go into your render properties for Blender, which is where you can turn on your bloom, but also go down to shadows, and you'll want to turn on soft shadows. Because, excuse me, it's the same thing. You don't want any soft blends for any of your cell shading effects. And then you'll want to bring up your cube size a bit too, which you'll see later, so you don't get nice clean edges. So once you have this, let's add another light in here just so we can see a little better what's happening. Bring it on top here. There we go. Make it about 2000. All right. We don't need that one. Okay, so once we got this, we just have the standard black and white here, but now we can just use that as our layer on top of our textures. You can either go in and hand draw your textures, or you can put color on there. So for example here, if we're using the way we did the Aaron Bruno, the psychedelic Aaron one, you bring in your texture, image texture. We're going to open up this sucker right here, this was the texture I used to put on his body to give him his suit. So it's the jacket color. There we go. All right, so we got that loaded in, and now we just need to blend it with our toon shader. So if you go to your mix color here, oh, whoops, sorry, wrong one. Come on. Frozen on me. Oh, maybe they do call it a mix. Okay. I've been using a slight older version of Blender, so I think the node just looks a little different now. But it's the same thing. So now you're going to put in your color into your B, and then the texture into your A, and then plug that into your main material output. There you go. And you don't want mix here, you're going to use multiply. There you go. And now you have your factor here, which you can adjust. So there's your toon shader on top of it, and now you can just adjust the transparency on top. And there you go. I mean, it's simple as that. That's all you need for a toon shader, because if you look at any cartoon, they don't have lots of gradations of color. It's literally just flats and then a shadow pass. And every once in a while, they might put a rim light on it too, which you could kind of do the same thing with another color ramp, but just make it white on the edges. All right. And then one other little thing that the finishing step for a toon shader is, let me put a little plane so it's a little easier to see here. You need the outline effect. So, all right, there we go. And you go back to the modifiers again, and they have one called a solidify. And what solidify does is, if you've ever made it, seen how people make toon shaders a lot of the time in Maya, is they'll take the geometry of the character, they'll duplicate it on top, and then expand it by the normals slightly, maybe like 1 or 2 pixels, and then they'll put a solid black shader on it, and then they'll hide back faces so it only shows the back surface that's revealing itself around the edges of the geometry of the main character. And that's exactly what the solidifier modifier does for you. And to show you what I mean here, if you go into, you got set your offset to 0 to start with, and then you have your thickness, which it just looks like it's expanding it right now because it's not really what the modifier was meant for, it's just sort of what it's been adapted to do, because it just duplicates the mesh on top and it'll inflate it on top of whatever you have. So I'm not sure what you'd use that for other than an outline. I'd be interested to see other uses for it. But the way you want to do it is you can layer shaders here in the shader editor as well in Blender. So what you're going to want to do is create a new shader here. And it's going to be another emission shader, so it doesn't take any light. It's just a solid color. And we're going to make it completely black. There we go. We'll call it the outline. Outline 9, but good enough. And what you'll want to do before you go back to the solidify, you want to go back here and turn on backface culling, which is what I was talking about before. It's going to hide the front-facing one. It's only going to show the edges of the geometry, the backside of it, which just peek out from the side of your original geometry. So, and the way to get it to show, it's not showing yet. You want to apply that to just the outline. So if you go back here to solidify and you go under materials, first of all, same thing here, you're going to flip your normals. So you're backface culling and flipping the normals, which is both just making only the back faces show. And then it has what it's called a material offset, which makes it jump up one material from the default. So if you had multiple textures on your object, say you had 3 of them on here, and then the 4th one was your outline, you'd do the well, it starts at 0, so your offset would be 3. But in this example, it's only 1, so you're just going to hit the arrow over once, and there you go. You can kind of see it popped on the black now. Oops. Get a little chunky here. There we go. All right. Yeah, and so now, let me turn off the selection so you can kind of see a little easier what's going on. Yeah, and then you have your outline there, and you can go and play with your thickness. You know, you got to be a little careful by getting too big. I mean, it is just an outline, so you're not going to do anything too crazy, because it is still geometry outside of your base character, so it's going to start affecting the shadows like this. So keep it relatively low. All right, and there you go. And you're good to go. So that's just the basic toon shader in like just a couple steps. It's just back over here. Your material, it's just the default shader, and you convert it to RGB and make a color ramp and plug it in, and that gives you your cell shading style, and then you just layer it on almost like Photoshop as a multiply layer over your texture. And then if you want to, you know, there's a bunch of like math nodes which you can, you know, watch some tutorials on if you want to get things like cross-hatching and kind of stylized stuff like that on your toon shader. But every time I've gotten into the weeds on that stuff, I always go back to just the simplest toon shader. It feels like it looks the best to me. So, and as you can see, other than just a little rim light I added on here, it's pretty much the exact same shaders I just set up on the sphere. And if you didn't even want to learn that and didn't want to put in that trouble or make it just a little easier plug and play, there's an add-on for Blender called Lightning Boy Shader, which you can watch, you can check out their YouTube as well. And it just installs a little plug-in for Blender that'll just a drag and drop effect of the same thing to give you a quick outline. It'll give you a rim light. It'll just give you the base cell shading thing, and it'll help you plug in your textures. It just makes it quicker and easier, but it's, under the hood, it's these same nodes under here. All right, so now we got that out of the way. You know how to make a simple toon shader. I'm gonna hide this. And let's just get rid of the sphere. We don't need that anymore. And the last step here, if you go in here, you'll see I had this reflective floor is kind of what brings it all together and makes it look super cool. So, and that's pretty easy to do as well. And just, if you aren't familiar with Blender, I'm using Eevee for all of this as well, which is almost like a game engine renderer. It's all real time, versus Cycles, which is more, a traditional style renderer, which I don't really use. I like all the real time stuff. But the problem is with Eevee, it uses a lot of fakery as far as real world lighting. And, let me just stretch this out real quick. I'm just making the plane that's going to go underneath this whole tunnel. So, let me do it on time. Okay, I got to hurry up here. But we're still okay. So, got the tunnel that'll stretch the whole expanse here. Let me turn off these lights so I can see what I'm doing. Almost there. All right. Just got it there. Okay. So as I was saying, the way that Eevee fakes a lot of lighting, especially things like bounce light, those just aren't done naturally in Eevee. If you're using a Cycles render, you can do things like you could put a sphere in and put an emission shader on it and have it glow, kind of like we were doing with this tunnel. And it's making these nice glow effect. And if you rendered it in Cycles, it would render the bounce light on the surrounding surfaces almost like a real light, which is really cool, a really cool effect. But Eevee doesn't do that, so you gotta find a way to fake it. And what it has is what it calls light probes, which you'll see here. It has an irradiance volume, which I won't use here, but say you have like a, I don't know, maybe you made a little noodle stand in the city or something, and it has all its little hanging lights, like light ropes that you just have textured brightly, but they're not actual lights. The irradiance volume will make a cube that you can scale up to encompass just that part of your scene, and then you can go under the irradiance volume and hit a button, and it'll do a version of baking all the light into your textures. But it's not actually baked into the texture physically, it's just done real time in scene, so you can see. I mean, I'd show you now, but it doesn't really work with the type of shaders we're using for this style of artwork. That's more if you're trying to do, sort of Unreal style, a little more realistic looking environments and characters. So, but for this one, the other light probe they have, which I love, is the reflection plane. All right, scale it up. There we go. All right, so there, but before we get into that, I gotta prepare the plane here. So the plane, just another one, just need to put a basic texture on it, but what you're gonna wanna do is set it up for reflections like you would with any shader, even with Cycles. You're gonna turn down your roughness so it's a nice smooth surface. You can bring up, you can already see it's getting a little reflective here. Oops. And you'll bring up your metallic. There you go. And you bring up your clear coat a bit there. Ooh, it's getting heavy. All right. So, but then this is just in the viewport shading. It just uses a temporary HDRI to kind of see what you're doing, but when you actually go into the rendered mode, it's not going to show that. But then that's when this comes into play, your light probe. Come on. All right. So same thing, you want it to encompass your whole plane, so I'll kind of drag it down to here. And as you can see, you want to go, the part you want to reflect is where the arrow is going to go. So we want the top of this plane to be reflecting what's above it, so we'll keep the arrow going upwards. Just scale it all the way down the road here. SY to scale it out. Okay. A little bit more. Then scale on the X. All right. And then what you're going to want to do is, oh, it needs a little bit more. There we go. Once you go in here, you hit grab and Z and bring it downwards. There you go. Basically, it has, you can kind of see, oh, here, let me turn it off for a sec. If you look off to the side here, it has these little lines here, and these are sort of the fall off above and below the plane. So you want to line up this middle line with your plane, and that'll create the most reflection. So as you drag it up and down slowly, you can just hit grab and Z axis and hold shift, and that'll help you adjust things more minimally. There you go. So just drag it till it pops on, and there you go, full on reflection. And as you can see, if you drag it up and down a little bit, it'll start affecting the fall off a little bit there if you don't want it to be a full 100% reflection. But for this one, I kind of like it just full because it makes it look like a whole cylinder. But yeah, and there you go. And I mean, this is relatively light on the system overall. I mean, this is a pretty beefy computer too, but you know, I don't think you need to have like a GeForce 4090 or anything to get this to even begin to work, you know. I mean, it'll work on an even older system too. It just might be a little more laggy and may take a little longer to render, but it still will work real time and you still can work on your scene. Excuse me. So, and yeah, now we got our psychedelic Aaron here. All right, so now, once we have that, one cool thing I like about Blender is, yeah, let me get all this stuff out of here. Yeah, all right. When you're using animation in Blender, it has, let me open up what it's called the dope sheet, which is similar to the dope sheet in Maya, if anyone's ever played like with that. And in the dope sheet settings, though, it has other settings like a shape key editor, your grease pencil keyframes, and it has an action editor, which the thing I like about the action editor is any animation you put on a single character, if I go in and zoom in on him here, he doesn't have any animation on him now, but if he did, I could just go in here, just drag it over a little bit more, and it has this title right here. And if I just animated him jumping, I could go in there and just to name it, jumping, jump dude or something. And then once you save it out, now it's saved in your scene, and you can go in and apply it to other characters. It shows up in this drop-down list. So, for example, I already recorded I have the motion capture of him walking down the tunnel, and I called it the long walk. And if it's the same rig setup, which it's another reason I use AutoRig Pro, is everything's using the same rig and everything's named the same, so I can interchange animation between all the characters. So, once you have here, you just hit long walk and it'll apply it to him. It's already plugged in instantly. And then you can just start playing, and he's walking through his tunnel right there. If I zoom in on him here. There you go. And this is kind of slow-mo right now because the scene was sort of slow motion, so I exported the motion capture at 100 frames per second. So that's kind of why it looks slow. It's not really the computer all that super lagged, even though it's a little heavy, but there we go. Yeah, it just has hiccups here and there. All right. So yeah, and then, I mean, just like that, if you've been tinkering around with Blender and you can kind of throw stuff together like this, you can just really experiment with ideas really fast. And because, I mean, we've been here less than an hour and we have this crazy scene, and I ended up doing this for Aaron with Awolnation and sent it to him too, and he totally tripped out on it. It was one of his favorite scenes from the whole video, which was good because our turnaround on that video was pretty crazy. I had to do almost entire scenes in a night. I would send him a cut in the morning, and he'd give me a bunch of notes, and sometimes he'd have a suggestion, which meant doing a whole new scene that night, after work, so I have like 3 or 4 hours to put together a brand new version of a shot or just a completely different idea to try to send his way to see if he likes it. So I was pretty burnt out and desperate at that time that he would like it because time was short, and it's really interesting working with a rock star on a project because I signed the contract with the label to do the work, and the contract says I have to deliver by a certain date or I don't get paid. So, but you got the rock star who, it's his music and his video, and as you start getting down to the wire and the deadline's looming close, you're like, hey, so yeah, how do you feel about this scene? Because I need to get working on the final pretty soon if you're cool with it. And he's like, oh, what's the rush? It's like, well, the deadline's coming up. He's like, oh, F the deadline, F the label. I don't give a crap about them. I was like, well, yeah, you can say that, but they're not going to pay me if I don't get it done. So you're kind of dealing with him just wanting to, not really care about deadlines and just be creative endlessly. And then me, with my label contract hoping to get it done. So we actually ended up delivering the video about 2 hours shy of my deadline. So it was a bit nerve-wracking, but it was a pretty fun process in the end. But yeah, it was heavy because I was busting out multiple shots every night for about 3.5 weeks. All right, so one last thing to kind of make this thing just slightly cooler is, let me go over here. I'm going to go back to the grayscale here and turn on a camera here. Oops, 3 viewport. There we go. You can look through the camera here with the textures. So what I'm going to do is, so he's walking along, we want the camera to kind of follow in front of him. So we're just going to constrain the camera to his feet in a group node. So if we bring the camera over to, turn that off real quick. All right. Oops, get out of pose mode here because you can't select anything else. That's one thing about Blender that's a little different from Maya too. I make a lot of comparisons to Maya because I use Maya a lot too, and I tend to screw up my hotkeys and modes that I'm working in because they're kind of opposite between the two, and it can kind of screw up your sort of second nature button pushing that you're used to doing. But if you want to animate in Blender, when you select the rig, it selects it as one single object, and if you want to actually animate it, you have to hit Control Tab, which brings you into pose mode, and that's when you can start manipulating all the individual pieces, because you always want to get in there and do, God's little hip wiggle, it's always the best part. Most animators spend a few hours just, wiggling the butt for a while. It's the best way to test out a rig. And all right, so you got this here. Get out of pose mode again so you can pick the other objects, the camera. And I'm going to bring it in here. Oops, where is my camera? All right. Come on. All right. Just going to bring it down by his feet here. Going to rotate on the Z there. Rotate it on the X upwards to get a nice view. Bring it right down to the ground. We're almost intersecting the floor. And he doesn't really fit too well in there yet, but this is when you get all sort of Beastie Boys video style. And you go in here and turn it into, let's say, 12mm camera. And now he's like super far away. We zoom in here so it's a little easier to see. All right. There you go. Bring it up a little bit more. All right. There we go. Now it's looking pretty cool. Kind of bring it up. There you go. Yeah, and so then all we want to do is constrain it to his root node here that's moving along. So if you just go in here and add an empty, which is just the same thing as like a locator in Maya. Actually, let me undo that. I want to do it right at his feet here. So I'm just going to put a little, there we go. It's got your cursor here. In Blender, you have a little cursor, and wherever you click the cursor in your scene is where your new objects will pop up. So if you make a sphere or a locator or anything, that's where they'll appear instead of always appearing at the 0 axis in your scene, which makes things a little easier for stuff like this. All right, so we've got our axis here. Drag it out a little bit. Freeze all transforms again. Whoops, no, don't do that with the empty. All right, so now we have our empty there, which is the camera controller. We're going to parent our camera in there. Keep the transform, hit Control P, object keep transform. And there you go. So now you have your empty, which is controlling your camera around like that. And then you can go down here under the constraints, and use an armature constraint. And that's where you can constrain it to one of the bones on your rig here. So if we go in here, oops, to this character, we want to constrain it to, oh, there we go, to this surface part right here. So if you go in and see what that's called, select it here. See, it's the C position right there. So exit out of that, go back to your constraint here. You're going to add target bone. And then you can use your little dropper here to select the rig here in your scene if you want. So there's the psychedelic Aaron selected. And then you want to pick your bone, and luckily it's right at the top. There's your C position, and link it up. Oh, and then it popped right off. Well, that's all right, we can fix that. I probably forgot to freeze the transform somewhere, but the good news is we don't have to worry about that too much. Rather than troubleshoot it right now, it's pretty easy to fix. We can just go in, grab the camera, grab it on the Y and line it back up right there. Oops. And now it's constrained, and you can just start dragging through. There you go. Turn off your position here. All right. And then he's good to go. So, and now you have your light tunnel psychedelic shot for your music video started here. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff you could do with that. And one other little add-on thing that I'll show you that's kind of cool about Blender is you can use audio files to manipulate your animation, and which is just sort of endless possibilities with that. Just to show you as an example. All right. So if we were going to take the brightness of this tunnel and sort of sync it to the song that we're making the music video for, you could take it here and go over here. I'll just play it for you here. If you guys have it too, I'm just going to play a little, like 15 seconds of an audio file here just to show you what I'm plugging into it. Once we animate in the scene, you won't be able to hear it. But just to kind of show you what I'm plugging into it, it's going to be this one. That's the Gingerbear Sci-Fi Pilot Muley music, the WAV file. Let me just load it up real quick. Yeah, so I'm just going to play about 10-15 seconds if you wanted to play it real quick. This is what you'll hear. So there you go. So that's it. But that's pretty simple. It's just a small clip from a song because you don't want to plug in like a 6-minute song waveform into your thing. You kind of just want to have the rhythm of the music going, and I kind of chose a piece of the music that's very sort of just kind of bass and beats, because you don't want to have, you want it to be, if anyone's seen what a wave file looks like, it's all the peaks and valleys of what your song actually looks like when it's rendered out. And you want to have it very clear, like silence and then a big beat, and then it dips down again, and then a big beat. If you're plugging something into it that's like, I don't know, a jazz song or something that has all kinds of different instruments playing at the same time, it's going to fill in your wave file, and it's just going to look like this solid mush going across, and it doesn't have a lot of peaks and valleys to use. And you'll see why that matters here in a sec when I plug it in. But so yeah, for this one, it's just a very simple sort of kick drum and bass beat. And what you can do is, all right, one sec, once it unfreezes, there we go. All right, so I'm going to open up the graph editor here. Scene's getting really full here too. Once you start using Blender a bit too, you'll learn to love having 2 or 3 monitors like I have at home, because it can get really crowded on the screen here. But it's great how flexible Blender is, because you can pretty much take anything down in the corner here and just drag, and it'll open a new window for you. And it's easy to close them back up if you don't want them. And any window you open up, you can just turn into whatever thing you want. Like this is going to be the graph editor, like I had already opened up. All right, let me close that. And then this is going to do the shader editor, because I need to select the shader. Oops, there it is. All right, so we have our shader here, which has the glowing lights. And if I turn it all the way off, it's just going to go black there, which is what I want for right now. I'm going to go to the first frame and just create a keyframe at 0. And then I'm going to go to the last keyframe of your timeline, and same thing, just create a keyframe at 0. Because what we're doing is we're plugging the waveform in to control the brightness of the texture. And so we want to start at black, and as there's sound that plays through the wave file, that peak of the sound will push the strength of the emission up to light it up. So just to show you what that does here. All right. So here's just your 2 keys on your timeline here. It's probably a little hard to see on this screen here. But you just select both of them here and go under key and say bake sound to F curves. And when you do that, you go in and find your wave file and just bake it in. Oh, actually you'll see what happens. I accidentally left it at the last frame, so let me undo. You want to go to the first frame. There you go. Now do the same thing. Just bake your sound to F curves. Bring in the wave file. And there you go. So that's what your wave file looks like. So you can kind of see here when it has that big bass kick, that's the peak here. And then in between those, it's almost like down to 0. And as you can see, like typical graph editor stuff here, your values are 0, usually from like 0 to 1 or even higher, because your emission, you can have it cranked up to, 50 if you want to make it glow. Excuse me. So, but you'll see when you first load it in here, you can't really grab it or do anything with it. So once you load it in here, you do your bake sound to F curves, and then after that, you go down to here and say unbake curve. And that will it takes whatever's in your timeline that's selected, which currently is 1 to 250, and it'll actually turn it into an actual curve with keyframes. And now you can manipulate it. And now you can grab it, and as you can see, as I drag it up and down, how it's going to affect your light. So I can bring it down. So I want it to be at the lowest part of the wave file to be below 0, which is totally black. And then we want the peaks here to probably go up to, the strength was like 20. So what we can do is we can scale your waveform until it reaches 20 up there. On your left side, if you look, we can scale it down, try to get it up to about 20 there. So scale it up, kind of, so grab it up, drag it up a little bit more. And there you go. And now, as you can see at the bottom too, here's all your individual keyframes for that. And now if you scrub through it, here I'll just hit, there we go. So yeah, it's gonna be a little slow, but now you can kind of see as we play through on all those peaks, it's making it light up for that. So then once you queue that up, and there's, which we don't have time to get into it now, but there's actually a video editor in Blender, which you can load video and sound into so that you can actually render your file out synced with this, this audio file as you're working on the scene too. But if you're working in a separate compositor, the scene's still going to be synced to the same speed, so it'll be easy to line up with the song once you get to that point. All right, so, and one other cool thing about the, one thing I love about Blender is how easy it is to just kind of get stylized and like experiment and stuff without too much extra work. And one of the things you can do is zoom in on the guy here again. Let's see. I'm gonna get rid of his hair to begin with here. Let's hide his hair so he's bald here. It's so flexible with how you can just tweak and hack stuff together, such as this head here. This is taken from the Reallusion character creator, as I mentioned earlier. And one reason I use that is it uses shape keys in Blender, which shape keys in Blender are the same thing as in Maya it's key shapes. Now I'm forgetting the name. Blend shapes, yeah, sorry, thank you. Same thing, sometimes I use Blender so much and I forget what the Maya version of it is and I forget what the hotkey is and I get mixed up between the two. So yeah, so the blend shape is the same thing as a shape key in Blender. And as you can see here, it has all the shape keys, which are kind of the standard motion capture blend shapes for faces, which is like, you know, you got your little, ooh, you know. But we aren't really gonna mess with those now. What we're gonna go do is add a new one at the bottom here. We'll call it swell head or something. And what's cool is Blender has so many things like kind of stuck together because it has a sculpt mode in there as well, which works a little bit like ZBrush as far as being able to manipulate your objects. And you can sculpt in it like clay. But some of the base level effects or tools in it, sort of like the pull and carve modes, you can actually just do some quick manipulation to your model. Like for example here, we create a new shape key. It comes in at 0, which means it has 0 influence of it. So we're gonna drag it up to 1, which is the maximum value there. And that's when we start doing our modifications. So we could just pick the head here, go to your sculpt mode here, and then it has this little tool here, the grab mode, and we can just start grabbing stuff. You know, we could have like, let's give him some horns or something, I don't know, something trippy here. Just gonna show this, it's literally blowing his mind with the music. That's what's gonna happen here, so. And you can just make it a little bigger. Let's really go crazy here. Did anybody ever see that MTV show, The Head? It was an old MTV show. There was a guy who had a giant head like this, and he had an alien living inside it. So, but it's a lot like ZBrush 2, where you can push and pull vertices and then just hold Shift to sort of soften it afterwards. So it won't be such a stretch if you're still using ZBrush and you need to jump in and use a couple of these tools for some simple modifications. All right, so we got this huge head now. Center it up a little bit there. All right, so now as you can see, it's at 1. So now if you drag it down, it goes back to normal. That's how it sort of animates. And it's the same thing. You could add your sound to it. You could go to, your value is at 0, just set a keyframe here. Same thing, go to the last frame, set another keyframe at 0, and then go back to the beginning. And if you go to your graph editor here now, select the keys, bake sound to F curves, same thing. You just bring in that wave file. You can see it added it in there. Go under unbake curve. And now in this case though, we're not going super bright like up to 20. We just want to do the value up to 1, which matches your shape key value. So if you zoom in a little bit down here, you can see the 1 there. You want to drag your waveform keys down a little bit till it's right about there. So you want to go down to 0 a little bit. And then you'll kind of see as you start scrubbing through, now that you've applied it, it's just going to start blowing out his head a little bit there with the music. So, and all right, so then let's give it a little more space so you can see it here. But as you can see, there's a it's kind of hard to see from this angle a little bit. I mean, it goes pretty tall, but another thing that Blender has that's sort of similar to Maya, although I think it's a bit inferior to Maya with this stuff, is animation layers, which is one thing that I love in Maya, and it doesn't really have real great in Blender, but what it has is what it's called the nonlinear animation editor, which if you go in here, it basically has all your animation here as clips, sort of like the action editor we used in the dope sheet earlier. And if you need to modify on top of it, you have your animation layer here. If you go under here and you hit this little button, it has the push down action, it's called. If you push it down, it'll make it its own freeform clip here that's non-editable. And it has this blank animation layer on top now where it used to be, and now you can animate on top of that. So if you want to have him keep doing the same walk, but now you want to have his head leaning forward, you can just do that now. So if you go into object mode, there we go. Could rotate his head forward, like way down. Let's do it way down. There you go. And then just set a keyframe. All right. And now as he walks, his head will just be forward like that, and you can kind of see his head just exploding, which it's a ridiculous animation, but you know, just kind of shows you what you can do with it so easily. You know, and this isn't really diving all that deep into the inner workings of Blender. This is all pretty surface level, easy stuff, because I get real lazy when you start talking about how to use, you know, really complex nodes, or if people want to start using Python and coding to really do some amazing stuff. And there's even what they call now geometry nodes, which I'm just starting to figure out that stuff. And if you just go and Google geometry nodes in Blender, you'll see people doing some amazing procedural stuff. But man, it's quite the rabbit hole to go down, so beware if you do it. All right, so then, yeah, so that's basically how I made the tunnel, and if you can just keep tweaking it and endlessly just adding to it as you go. You can even, come on, keeps going. You know, once you have this too, you can just start making additional shots. You know, you can kind of set up cameras the same way. Once it's constrained to them, you can do a shot over here with them walking. You can kind of do reverse shots. You know, it's kind of endless what you can do there, and you just have this endless tunnel. And even if you wanted to do, you know, you see a little hole at the end of the tunnel, you could just put a plane back there. Same thing, just put a vertical reflection plane back there, and it'll look like the tunnel goes on forever. All right, so that's the tunnel. Hopefully that wasn't too boring or complicated, but I know I'm blowing through a lot of steps really quick and fast too, without explaining how each piece of Blender works, but it really is just very surface level Blender stuff, though. It's not really that complex to learn. So, especially if you already learned Maya and you already have a certain amount of knowledge about 3D software in general. So, so yeah. And then just one last thing I'll show you here as far as in the scene. Let me save this. Also, don't do what I just did and work for an hour without saving, because then if it crashed, you're just going to really cry, especially if you're on stage in front of people. So, but yeah, so there's the tunnel. All right. Okay, and now, real quick, and this is, you'll be surprised at how fast this is. I'm going to show you the poor man's army real quick. They're we call it the, yeah, poor man's army, a good way to explain it, I guess. All right, so I'm going to open up this base scene again with your 3 characters here. Turn them on. Just takes a second to turn the textures on initially. Actually, we don't need to worry about textures yet. Let's leave those off. All right. So I call this, it's like a budget army, because this isn't necessarily the correct way to do it. This is just sort of one of the ways you can hack something together with Maya, or I mean with Blender. So what I'm going to do, the way I'm going to make this army is I have each of these characters, and as I was showing you in the dope sheet here, we have those different those clips of animation that we can plug in. So I'll pick this first guy. Let's give him the walk. And so there he goes. He's walking, as you can see back there. And this guy, the psychedelic Aaron, let's actually make him be let's give him the goth dance, I called it, which is just him kind of this, I can't remember. I think, yeah, this was actually him dancing as well, too. One of the clips from him dancing in the motion capture suit. So we'll put that on him. And then this other robot guy, let's put the walk on him as well. And if we zoom in on these guys too, if you'll see, we're kind of setting up to have these guys duplicated several times through the scene. And of course, with the same motion capture clip on both of them, they're walking the exact same time, which we don't want. We want to sort of offset it. So what you can do is you have these little two boxes here, which will make a new action. It'll duplicate the action and just version it up one, but it'll be its own separate piece. So like here, I'll just hit it here. You'll see what happens. It makes it the same name, but .001. And so now, if I go into pose mode, oops, select all, it gives you all your keys down here in your timeline or here in your action editor. And now you can just grab them and drag them to sort of offset it from your other character. So now he's stepping differently. So yeah, I'm just dragging all the keys down a bit, and now you'll see they're, oop, hang on. There we go. That'll be a little more obvious. Yeah, so you can kind of see their walks are kind of offset from each other. Because you don't want to have the whole army walking at the same time. So, all right. So, what we're going to do here is we're going to create a plane to start with. What are we doing on time? Okay. Yeah, I can do this in about 10, 15 minutes. All right, so we're good. All right. Drag your plane up, make it kind of big. Scale it up. I'm going to go into edit mode here, hitting tab. I'm just going to subdivide it a couple times. All right, so when we take this plane, we're going to go over here to the right here, and we're going to go into the particles tab. And you're just going to add a default particle here by hitting this little plus sign. And when it opens up, you can choose either emitter or hair. And we're going to use hair right now. And it's going to create a bunch of hair follicles sticking up that are sort of randomized. And what we're going to do is we're going to set it up so that each of these characters, each of these follicles will load one of these characters at random. And so you can kind of see here, pretend each of these little lines is one of the characters as it's laid out. You can have your number here. It's at 1,000. That's pretty high for now. Let's get it down to 200. We can raise it. You can raise it again later too. This is all sort of non-destructive as you're going. And your seed will sort of change how it's randomized there. You can kind of see it scrubbing through. Now, the way to do this is you turn on advanced, and if you scroll down, you have your render version here. And it's rendered as path, which is what this little hair follicle line is. But what we're going to do is render a collection. But before I do that, the way Blender keeps things together, aside from groups, it also uses collections. I'm going to make a new one here real quick. It's sort of like groups of groups. You'll see, oh, come on. Is it frozen? Come on. Oh, sorry. There we go. Collection. Let's call that our characters. And now if I take each of these, each collection here is each individual character. And if you look inside the collections, it has all their geo, all their rigs, everything, all collected in one neat little box here, which is what the collection is. So take all three characters' collections and drag it into here. Now the problem is, right now, the way these are set up, these are all individual pieces. And what it's going to do is it's going to take all these follicles, and each follicle will pull one piece of geometry that's in this whole collection. And right now, if you have a follicle, it's going to pull, like, one follicle will pull the guy's boots, and the other follicle might pull this guy's jeans or something. And we don't want that to happen, because then it'll split up all your characters separately. So what you'll want to do real quick is you go into your character, select all the geo, and hit Control-J to join them. So it creates them all as one piece, but it's still skinned to the rig, and it's still moving correctly. And so we're going to do the same thing, and that way, when these follicles are pulling from the geo, whenever it pulls a version of the geo from that group and randomizes it, it's pulling this whole character instead of individual pieces. So we'll do the same thing with this guy here. Excuse me. Same thing. Control J to join, and then we got one more here. There we go, Control J to join, and now we've just got 3 individual characters. And now, like I was saying, this is still a bit of a hack job because they all each have a control rig too, and it's going to be pulling that as one of the objects it duplicates to, as well as the follicles. But we don't have to worry about that too much because we can just turn that off when we render it. So just to kind of show you what's going to happen here, you go back to your plane, and now we have this characters collection set up correctly. We go down to render as and choose collection, and that's where it pops up this instant collection here, and we choose our characters. And as soon as I do that, so they're really tiny now. There's a couple things you got to do to set up though. You want to turn on the object rotation, which will bring them all down to the plane, but they're all sideways. So you want to go up under this rotation tab here and change your orientation axis for the global y-axis, which is the straight up and down. And there you go. Now they're all standing upright. So they're really tiny right now, but that's what we have the scale here for too. There you go. So as I scale up, you can start to see. And you can kind of eyeball it, but I think it's about 0.25, ends up being about the same scale as the original characters. And now, we could go up to and raise the number too. So we can have just a whole bunch of them. And there's just a ton. And the thing that's cool is if we turn off the selection, it hides. Oh, whoops. I forgot to turn off one of the helmets, but hang on. We can get rid of that. Well, it doesn't matter for now. If we turn it on, you'll kind of see what's happening here. Just turn it on the textures here, and then you'll sort of see what they look like. There we go. Come on, all right. I think, there we go. One other thing I forgot to do is when you do the combining them all, you'll also want to freeze their transforms as well, which is Control A in Blender, freeze all transforms, and that'll orientate them all the correct way. So same thing. Now everyone's lined up. All right, so one thing you'll see here, it made this guy blow out all weird, but this is actually an easy fix. This was actually the outline layer that I had on him. When I combined all these, it made it sort of freak out. So, but all you have to do is go here and delete the solidify layer. There we go, now we're back to normal. And now, if we just play it, oops. Turn to grayscale mode. It's getting a little heavy, but now you can sort of see your army of guys walking there. There you go. So yeah. Pause it there. Yeah. There you go. And it's sort of mixed in with the guys dancing too. You could have just had just one guy dancing if you wanted, but you know, try to get as much variety. And as you can see, you know, they're all sort of, there's a couple of them are offset, but some of them are duplicated too. But all you have to do, if you want to get even more offset cycles and animation cycles, you can bring in as many characters as you want into this characters collection and put whatever animation you want on them, and it'll just start looping them in there and repeating them. So if you don't want 2 psychedelic Aarons in a row right there dancing together, then you don't have to. And if you want to take any of them out of there too, you just delete them from the collection and they'll disappear. So let's go back in here, see how high we can go. Okay, let's see if we go up to 1500. There we go. So yeah, and then, you know, so this is kind of a rough version of what we ended up seeing in the video with all the guys walking past him. So, oopsie. I've watched this video 400 times, so you'd think I'd know exactly where it is, but yeah. So just a much higher level, but it's the same thing. I just had a bunch of these guys walking at random. I think I brought in about 6 or 8 different ones and slightly offset all their walks so they would all have a slightly different bounce as they're walking, but otherwise it's just that. They're just walking straight along a plane with him dancing in the middle. So yeah, and there's your cheap army without having to spend, you know, hundreds of dollars on Mari or whatever army plugin you use, you know, to get your army going. So, but like I said, it's a little limited. It's just going to kind of repeat them where those follicles are. You could probably manipulate it where you could have particles travel along a surface as well. But then you're starting getting deeper into actually manipulating particles, but it is possible. But, all right, turn on the, see if it'll turn on the textures one more time here. There you go. Yeah, the only thing that might pop up when you merge the textures is sometimes it'll knock the texture off their shirt, but it still exists. You'll just have to go in and relink the texture to those faces later on. And yeah, there you go. And if you want to get all really psychedelic, you could go in and, yeah, if you want to go all retro wave here. There we go. You could do one more step here. You could make your plane, scale it up. You know, subdivide it a few more times here. One more time there. Once you get that, another one, you can go into your modifier here and do what they call the wireframe. There you go. It's kind of hard to see what's going on there. There you go. Oh, let's see. There you go. Now you have your wireframe here, and you can go in, put an emission shader on there, make it purple, I guess, make it really bright, and turn off the lights. And now all you have to do is put a little sun in the background and a Ferrari, you know, and then you have your 80s style background for your, you know, your lo-fi synthwave playlist on YouTube going. Because once you have this too, this is also a good way to render your wireframes on your models, which for some reason was always so difficult when I was a student here at Gnomon, trying to figure out how to do it in Maya, like 10 years ago. It was always so difficult to find a way to do a wireframe. And I mean, it's much easier in Maya and Blender. Like, everyone sort of has a default to do it easily now. But it just brings me back to the days when I struggled so much. And then, yeah, you can turn on your army here. If you go into your plane, but I don't want to actually see the plane, I can just make it, it's getting a little heavy. One more thing here. Transparent BDSF, which is just a straight up transparent shader. Change your blend mode to alpha blend. There you go, and it should disappear now. Oh, actually, hang on here. All right, maybe that's not working so well. There we go. Oh, I know why. Be careful you don't create your plane inside the collection with all your characters, because now it's trying to duplicate it with all those particles. All right, now, there we go. So yeah, now we've got our army walking across the synthwave platform here. And then, you can even get really crazy and go in to your sculpt mode again. You can zoom out a bit here, make your brush really big. Do your grab one, you can start grabbing stuff and bringing it up. Now you have your hills on the side, so you can put a street down the middle, and that's where you can drive your Ferrari when you add it in here, But yeah, because then when you go down to the level, you got your Star Wars fly through, the old Star Wars TIE Fighter game, or these guys, so. And then if you don't want to be able to see through it like this, you can just duplicate the plane. Oops. And turn off the wireframe and give it its own shader. You can delete that glowy one and give it a black one. Oops, there we go. Emission shader, black. There you go. And now it's all solid through there. And then you can turn your army back on. And there you go. You got your army of psychedelic dudes walking through the retro wave valley here. So, and all you got to do is turn on your ragdoll dynamics and have a Ferrari drive through and run them all over and send them all flying and spinning and stuff. But you know, I don't have the add-on for that. So, all right. So hopefully I wasn't too boring seeing that stuff. But I mean, this is kind of what my nightly life was when I was doing that music video, which, you know, I mean, like I said, even now, you know, this is under 2 hours we did all this stuff, and this was me kind of figuring this out as I went along on a lot of this stuff too. It's not like I already knew how to do all these things in Blender. It's more the way I've been learning Blender is as I come across something I need to do or I have an idea in my head, I'll just try to figure it out how to do it. And usually either by tinkering around or even just a simple tutorial, I can usually figure it out that night and get something put together and done. It's like, it's so simple and fast like that with a lot of Blender things. And that's why I enjoy it so much. And I mean, there's a lot of comparisons to, you know, Unreal and Maya and, you know, the, how flexible that software is based on what you want to do. And those programs are really powerful too. And I would never say don't use those because I use Maya more than anything in my day job, and sometimes I still use Maya in unison with Blender. But the main thing with that is, you know, if you're using it at home, it does cost money, even though Maya does have an indie version you can buy now for like $250 a year, I think, which isn't too bad. But it's more just the ease and flexibility of Blender to do stylized work, because, you know, I could, you know, spend a whole hour just talking about how to do this texturing. Whoops. You know, it's because all my stuff is very, very stylized and very sort of comic book or animated style. And you can even go in when you have a character like this. Let me just turn all this off because this is heavy. Sorry about that. It'll be easier to just show you here. You know, when I made this texture, for example, you have your base texture with these trippy circles, and then you have these glowy sleeves, but you can just plug in an emission shader as its own separate layer on top of it, and then just start drawing all your glowy parts on top of it. You know, so you can, and then same thing in here, like you can use, I mean, you can get into grease pencil as well, which you can actually just freehand draw on here, almost like you're drawing in Photoshop or some of the VR drawing programs where you're just drawing in 3D space with curves. And once you do that, you can animate it with keyframes and you can parent it to your character to follow them along too. So it's like endless the possibilities you could do with grease pencil linked to your characters. And same with here, I just put these circle textures on here, I started hand drawing wrinkles on top, and then you just do your glowy things on top of that. So you can kind of just start experimenting. And it's all based on values. So it's, you know, you have your shader color, but it's all based on black and white, which I'll show you. Some of the textures I drew. It's a layered shader, so like his shirt is just this black and white shader for the line work. And then I showed you this is the texture for the jacket color. And then the glowy bits are, let's see, did I bring that one? Oh wait. Oh, here's his face that I just hand drew. And this isn't even drawn in Photoshop. This is actually just drawn directly in Blender on the 3D model. I think maybe I didn't bring that one. Let me make sure. Oh yeah, and here I had the logo that I put on the backs of the robots as well. That was another layer. You can just keep layering it up, just like Photoshop, basically. The amount of layers you can layer up for shaders is endless. So, yeah, so same with these guys. Well, let's see. Let me go back to these. Same thing. Make sure you save your scene. All right. Oops. Hopefully that wasn't too loud in people's ears on streaming. But all right, close this one here. That texture's back on. And we're just about done here. Yeah, so same thing with these. I set them up the same way. It's not as glowy. And then even on the back, I just had the Awolnation logo, which was on another layer. And the way their shader network is set up, it can get pretty complex. But it's all very basic. It's just layering textures on top of textures, just like Photoshop style. Yeah, so this looks kind of crazy with all these things linking together. But really, all these ones like that I've selected here, these are all just individual textures. Like this is the jacket glow, which is the pink areas. This one's the lines, which is the wrinkles. And then down here is the logo. And the logo is actually combined with the color of white for the jacket, but it's just a white plane. So, and then each of those is just plugged into a multiplier layer. And all that is doing is making it multiply just like you would use as a multiply layer in Photoshop to multiply the black lines on top of your color. And then it's just going to make all the white drop out and your black lines stick on top. So, and that's it. So if you're familiar with Photoshop, a lot of the shader nodes in Blender will actually make a lot of sense, and they're really easy to use. And I'm used to using After Effects and Photoshop for a lot of my texturing and compositing, so it just falls right into line with that, because Blender even has a compositor built into, and it works very much the same way. It's probably closer to a node-based version of After Effects than something like Nuke, because I've tried to use Nuke and I was really confused because I'm used to After Effects, but Blender was actually really easy to figure out for compositing. So, but yeah, so that's the main stuff I was going to show you today. Hopefully that was interesting and inspiring a little bit, and people are still awake after all that. But so I hopefully that gets you inspired to like play around with Blender and figure some stuff out. It's just kind of crazy how you can just get super stylized and play with trippy stuff and just do whatever you want so quickly, and just kind of see where it takes you. And like I said, you never know what it could lead to, because I was doing, let's see, hang on. This was the thing, I won't play the sound here, but this is what I did. This took me about 10 days total to do this last year. I just had an old character I'd made in Blender that was part of another little animated project I tried doing, but I was trying to make an animated version of a really cool comic book I liked called Starlight that was written by a guy named Mark Millar, who created Kick-Ass, and it's one of my favorite comics of all time, and I was going to make an animated short, and I actually showed it to him on Twitter, and he thought it was really cool, but then he broke the news that Disney owns the rights to it, so that was dead in the water. But this was like the sci-fi pilot I'd made for that project, and I still wanted to use it. So yeah, I put her in this, and I put myself on the mocap and just did all this dancing with her and put it in, and it was just so quick to just kind of play with stuff in Blender, duplicating characters, very simple shader. I just hand drew, same thing, I just hand drew the texture in here. I drew the line art, and then I did the colors on a separate layer. And same thing, I just had, pick these ones and put an emission for the glowy eyes. And yeah, just like Photoshop, drawing in layers and layering it up. And then a lot of what this was is you can either put images as planes as your background here with some video on it, this is just stock footage I found on YouTube of synthwave stuff. Sometimes I'd layer it up in After Effects, render it out, put it in here. Or you could just render out the character on an alpha plane and put him in, excuse me, on your compositor on top of effects and start blending that way too. So yeah, it's just really easy to just start playing and mixing and tinkering and hacking, So yeah, there you go, and that's Blender. That's the latest of Blender from Jason Hall. So,
Awesome.
Any questions? Hey, time is it? Hey, we got a little time.
Yeah,
All right.
we'll pull some questions towards you, but first, thank you so much.
Yeah.
That was awesome. Very creative, very
Cool.
interesting way to see taking like basic like concepts and like really pushing the visual look and coming up with something like new and unique. So that was really, really cool to see. So thank you for that.
I would recommend just going on Sketchfab and just grabbing lots of cool models and things and just kit bashing like this and rigging them up really easy.
That's awesome.
One last thing I'll say too is I use a thing called AutoRig Pro, which was an add-on you can buy for like $35, but Blender comes with its own auto rigger called Rigify 2, which is also super powerful. One will even do facial rigs for you too, and it's so easy to use. It'll just build a skeleton for you, and you could just grab a bunch of, because I built all those guys' helmets by just these free helmets from Sketchfab that people offered for free, and it's all royalty free. You just grab a whole bunch of stuff, kitbash it together, and parent it to that skeleton, and you're animating in like 20 minutes, you know. So
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. So we got some questions coming in, I think, right?
Oh, cool. All right. Hey, thanks for the talk. That's super duper inspiring, and very similar to kind of what finals are like right now. Doing an animation in 3 weeks, like getting a whole thing rendered and done, like that's very stressful. I understand that. I wanted to ask, what was the process like for signing a contract with the record label people? Like, you mentioned that you would only get paid at the end. Did you get any upfront stuff or any other interesting things you could share or not share?
I can share all that. It was the first time for me too. So it was a little bit scary, honestly. I kind of just, it wasn't like some $100,000 gig or something and like giving away all these rights. From the start, I was basically just providing a service for the style and the characters, and I was like, I'm just going to do the art how you want it, and then when it's done, it's all yours. I don't really care. I'm not preparing to monetize or anything. So, I got the initial contract, and I was a little scared, like, should I have a lawyer read this over to make sure I don't get totally screwed and stuff, But like that, it was kind of just a work for hire thing. So it's kind of like the same thing as I do for movies when I do previs. I come in, and I don't even sign a contract for that. It's just part of the NDA you sign. You go in, you're going to model assets for them to match whatever their concept art is and animate it. And then when it's done, they own all that stuff. And that's just kind of how it goes. And that's kind of how I treated this. So I wasn't too worried about rights to assets and designs and things like that. And then as far as pay, they actually offered to pay me half up front and then half when it's finished, which is kind of what I would usually ask as well. I think is the best way to do things, because I've been screwed over plenty of times doing that stuff too, especially in my 20s. I was trying to break into the comic book industry. I did so many comic gigs where you'd do several pages drawing, and then you find out that they don't even have the money to pay, and you did all this work, and you just can't, it never gets published, you never give them the work, you never get paid, and it's just, you wasted all this time, and then you can't even show it to like get other jobs because you probably signed an NDA to do the work for them, so you have nothing to show for it, which is so frustrating. So, and there's no way to avoid that completely, even with this stuff. And I like I said, I didn't, it's probably smart to have an entertainment lawyer or somebody read a contract before you do it. But also in this case, it was very similar to the contract that my friend had done. Had done a music video for him as well, for his last album, and he was actually good friends with him and he'd actually done several projects with him, all under the same contract and with the same label. And they always paid on time. It was very trustworthy, and there was no kind of shady stuff. So I had an entertainment lawyer would probably tell me I'm totally foolish, but I sort of trusted them more going in because I already knew the people and I had some good references on it. So, but yeah, and like I said, it was half up front and half at the end. But honestly, I got so busy, I forgot to turn the paperwork in soon enough to get the half up front. But and then I sent it in, and they offered to pay it to me then. But it was only like less than 2 weeks from the finished thing, anyways. And if I didn't turn it in by the deadline, and they wouldn't pay me, then I would have had to pay back the first half. They'd pay me too, and I'm actually more comfortable with them just holding on to it instead of having to dig it out of savings again. Because I was getting real nervous the last week, like 10 days, that it wasn't going to be delivered, and I was like, oh my God. I never thought I wouldn't get paid, but I was worried there could be some legal issues where it might take a while to get paid, and in the meantime I might have to pay back some money until it gets resolved, and then I get paid the lump sum. So in that case, I just opted to kind of just let it lie at the time. And they were very communicative and stuff. There was no like long delays in talking to them whenever stuff came up. So, so yeah, hopefully that answers everything. If you have anything else.
Okay. Well, I mean, I kind of wanted to ask a little more about like freelance work in general. Like, sorry, I think I forgot my question. Ah, crap. Yeah, I'll hand it over.
Back and forth. Oh, yeah.
Going off of that, just out of curiosity, Do you charge for iterations or revisions, or was there like a set amount of changes that were in the contract, or how did the iterations play out?
I would, sometimes I would, like if I were gonna do something like just a character design or a character model or something, I would actually work that into the initial contract. Like I would be like, you know, same thing like when I used to do comics, I've had things where they're like, all right, I need 4 pages a week, but then they come back with like 50 revisions every day, and there's no way you can get those 4 pages done in a week, so you need to only allow like 2 revisions, for example. That's usually what I'll do. If I'm gonna limit the amount of revisions or iterations, I'll make it 2 or 3 times back and forth, depending on the schedule. In this case particular, I didn't really work that into it because I knew basically it's not going to really matter how many iterations there are. It's more just we're limited on time anyway. So, I mean, he started getting a little wishy-washy at the end, and I got a little worried. But at the same time, I knew that the label would pressure him a little bit too, because it had to coincide with the release of the song. So even if he wanted to be kind of loosey-goosey on the deadline, either way, it still had to be done by a certain time to release with the song on the label, which was already set up long before. So I knew that we could only really resolve things or revise things a certain number of times before we just had to lock it in based on the deadline. So.
And let me, not to step on your toes or interject, but
yeah.
It's kind of, in this project, you're kind of more of like the director over someone being kind of, like they're already contacting you because of your style and what you're doing. So it's a little bit different entering into a project like that than like, hey, I need you to do a photoreal animation of a cheetah running and jumping off of a rock, because they're bringing you in specifically because your vision and your storytelling and your camera work from the get-go. So you really just have to deliver something that's what you do.
It's like when they'll hire like a certain director to direct like, you know, a League of Legends trailer or something. They bring a lot of people in because of their specific style that they do. And that's kind of how I treated this too. And like, the way the contract covered me and the way the work was scheduled, worked the same way as me individually because it was just me doing it by myself. But it wouldn't have been any different if I'd had a small studio with like 20 artists doing it too. I would have had to charge more, and you know the schedule might have been different. Probably would have got it done faster, but yeah. Otherwise, that's kind of how it was treated. Like it was like they were hiring a studio. Like I was the director with my studio doing the work for them, because that's actually how it's credited on the contract. It's credited under Gingerbear Haus Studio, which is my studio, instead of just my name.
Sure.
So.
You got another question here?
Yes. This is a very strange mic.
Yeah, what is that cube mic?
This is weird.
You can toss it to people.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you for like coming so much. This particularly was great. I just like making little music videos in Maya or Blender or something is like how I got into 3D, you know? Yeah. It was always from my friend's cruddy SoundCloud rap, but you know, and so I guess my question is, you know, as someone who is going into like the industry for like, you know, TV and film and stuff for like my job, but who artistically like this is exactly what I want to do. Like, you know, like the thought of like a band reaching out that I love to like do a video, like it's insane. So I guess my question, aside from just like, you know, keep on doing it and putting stuff out there, do you have any tips on someone who really wants to like break into that music video community and just kind of space?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm sort of kind of exploring that path myself too, because I mean, I have the one path that I took when I came to Gnomon and started working in previs. I just wanted to do previs for movies, and I got hooked up with a previs company, and I started working on movies and doing animation and stuff, whereas this is very different. This is like the complete package, and it's for music videos. It's a different genre, different industry. And that's, I think the best way to do that now, and I was actually just talking to someone the other day who used to be a director. He's done like a League of Legends one. He's done a few of the Overwatch trailers for Blizzard, and I think he did a World of Warcraft one. It's a friend of a friend. I'm spacing his name off the top of my head. I should know that. But he does the same thing now. He started doing, like the best advice I would say for this, which is kind of how I got this gig and how I plan to continue from here, is start doing these little stylized experiments and start putting them up on like social media and stuff, you know, and like, you know, cue it up to music, like find a cool song or write your own music, because that's how this started. I just wrote, you know, I'm always kind of practicing DJing and writing electronic songs on my own at home, which I did for this. I wrote one over the holidays, and then I made a music video for it all in the course of a week and put it out there, and it led to a song release and an Awolnation video. But then once you get that out there too, it starts sort of steamrolling after that. Like, you know, Awolnation's a pretty big band, so if that gives you some credibility, so then when other people see it, they have a little more trust that you're like a legit artist and could pull it off, which I haven't, excuse me, I haven't done another gig on a video since this one yet. Some of it's a little bit because of time, but also just no one's pulled the trigger yet, but I have some discussions going. Like there's a synthwave guy called Samuel Valentine, and he plays with Kravinsky, who did the music for Drive and that Night Drive song. And I've talked to Carpenter Brute recently. He wrote me on Instagram based on this video, and he thought it was cool. And once he does his next album, he wanted to maybe talk. And there's a couple other people, like bands I really liked, that I actually reached out to. And the fact that I already had this online, I was able to just send it to them, and it's like a complete package instead of just an idea. It's actually like a finished piece. And I sent that to them, and that actually made them write back quickly. And it's kind of the same thing with them. There were a couple like dream projects I wrote to, like a couple of my favorite artists that I heard they were coming out with some music, and I don't want to say and jinx it, but I've been talking to them too, and they're sort of just in the early talks about starting to do music videos, because the music's going to be coming out, the album's going to come out in the next year. And so I'm kind of just lightly keeping in touch for when they're ready, but it's in discussion, and they've all seen the video and they all liked it. So they're all kind of like, oh yeah, we liked it, it was cool, let's talk, but we're not quite ready yet, you know. So I'm not sure how lucrative it is as a full-time job, but I'm hoping it'll lead to something like that too, that you could just have your own small studio. But it's interesting too, because it's not like music videos like they were in like the MTV days, where there's just, you know, music videos don't pay as much and they don't make as many of them anymore. So there's not as much work just in general out there, and it's sort of more of a niche than it used to be. But, and the director I was mentioning too, he's sort of started the same way. He just started doing these little experiments and putting them up on Instagram and stuff, and on YouTube, and then he started getting these little one-off jobs here and there, just like this. He would do a little short or a little music video, and then that, as well as putting his little experiments up on social media, both of them started to sort of snowball a little bit, and to the point where he was getting enough interest and enough work in that he eventually just kind of quit. He was working at Blizzard at the time, actually, and he finally just quit and started his own studio, and he's been doing that for, I think it's like well, maybe like close to 5 years now, and it's still going great for him. So, but it's a grind though, because he still has a YouTube channel going. He does a lot of stop motion animation that he puts on YouTube as well, but he's still regularly posting his clips to social media, still experimenting. So a lot of it's just that now, just getting people interested in your style and getting it noticed, and then that'll bring the other people calling, you know. It's the same thing like with musics and DJs, you know, like if you want to get booked as a DJ, they're like, well, you got to have followers online. You know, you can't just send them a CD anymore with a really amazing set. They're not going to care how good you play. They just want to know that you have this many followers on SoundCloud or like on TikTok or something, and then they'll book you, you know. And it's kind of the same for this. They're going to want to, you know, the style will get them interested, but they have a little extra trust if you are a bit like legitimized by just having views or followers and interest in general. So, and it can work even farther down, like, you know, this is all part of me promoting my other personal work, like animated shorts that I'm working on that I'd like to pitch too. And if they already have interest and have seen this, then they're willing to listen to the other stuff. So yeah, so I would say, yeah, especially if you're starting to learn Blender, just experiment with little small pieces, a couple shots at a time, play with style, get them out there, put it out with music, if it's music video specific, you know, especially with Instagram nowadays. Any song that's on Spotify you can put on your reel now or your story, so you don't have to worry about copyright stuff as much as you used to, which is partly why I did my own song for the first music video I wanted to do, because I didn't want to put it up on YouTube and have it muted or taken down for copyright infringement. So I just did my own song. Yeah, it happens pretty common. I knew a lot of people that it happened to, and I was like, well, crap, you know. And same thing with, I've been working on an animated short for the last couple years in my free time. And I had a song that I wanted to use for that, and I started looking into, which basically was the backing music of almost the whole entire thing, is by a band called We Are Wolves, and I started looking into who holds the rights to that. And it just gets so complicated that I ended up just writing my own song in the same vein. And I kind of liked the song pretty well, so I'm kind of going with that. And so now I don't have to deal with it, because I'd hate to do all that work and then have the label or the band shut it down, and now you have this entire short queued to this music that you can't even use, and it's just like, I mean, you could tweak it for another song, but you could go through the same thing again, so, yeah. So,
Awesome. Well, thank you.
yeah, thanks.
Well, I think we're going to shut down shop and let everybody go home and go to bed, but
Yeah.
hopefully inspired and creative and wanting to make music videos.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Jason. Let's give him a round of applause. And
Thanks, yeah. I heard you're all in finals too, so if you're in finals and watching this, thanks for coming, because I'm a graduate of Gnomon too, and I know how brutal that is. So there was no way I was making it to any events when I was in finals. So thanks a lot.
Good night,
Appreciate it.
everyone.
Thanks.